As Todo and Mahito began their battle, Todo had repeatedly dodged every single one of Mahito's attacks, until Mahito had gone for a Black Flash, attempting to land a Black Flash on Todo. However, right in that moment, Todo swapped places instead with his brother Yuji Itadori. As the thoughts gone through Yuji's head, "You've got it from here," the words from Nanami, as Yuji thinks to himself, "I was about to use my sins as an excuse to run away. I'm sorry, Nanami. I was about to take the easy way out." Before, Yuji landed a Black Flash right on Mahito's gut. However, in this timeline there was a slight difference, a slight change in comparison to what would happen normally, as in this timeline, Yuji landed a Black Flash on Mahito's gut. However, after he landed that Black Flash, 4 scissor lines appeared on Mahito's gut before starting to cut at his body as he was launched away, as Yuji had now awoken Shrine, the cursed technique of Ryoma and Sukuna. Hello everybody, it is I, Eternal Flame here, and today I am here to do another Jujutsu Kaisen What If one-shot, where in this What If one-shot, I want to look at the possibility of how the timeline would change if Yuji had awoken Shrine earlier, if Yuji had awoken Shrine against Mahito, and how that would affect everything up until the point of the Sukuna battle. After all, I already made a video talking about why I think this was a good idea for a narrative, so I thought, hey, why not actually make this a video and explore this possibility since I like it so much. So without further ado, let's get straight into the What If. As all 3 of them were brought to a pause, all 3 of them having different thoughts circulating through their heads. As Mahito began to think to himself, is Sukuna helping him? No, that can't be it. Sukuna would never help Yuji. Sukuna hates Yuji just as much as I do. After all, that's the reason he didn't kill me before, back when we fought for the first time, because we laughed at him together. And that cut, while strong, it felt weaker than the one Sukuna had delivered to me even when he was in that state. While at the same time for Todo was thinking that Yuji never had a curse technique, so there was no way he could land slashes like that. It didn't make sense. However, Todo and then later on Mahito both realized what had happened. Yuji Itadori had awakened the curse technique of Ryoma and Sukuna. However, the thoughts going through Yuji's head in that moment were a little bit different, as Yuji had his hand shaking for a moment because he had used the same technique that he had witnessed end so many lives in Shibuya, the same technique of Ryoma and Sukuna himself, as thoughts began to go through his head, thoughts of questioning if he was Sukuna or if he wasn't Sukuna, if he was no different than him, and the world was just spinning at him and laughing at him. Even though Yuji had just awoken Shrine, he chose not to use it. He chose to reject it. He didn't want to be a Sukuna. He didn't want to be the next Sukuna because he didn't want to use the same technique that had caused so much pain to so many people. As it was then Mahito was the first to break the silence, as he then said, well, Sukuna Jr.'s finally up and awake, huh? Using your old dad's technique, you're gonna cut me apart like how he cut apart so many people? Come on, bring it on. However, in that moment, Todo clapped and appeared right behind Mahito and landed his own Black Flash on Mahito as well, as Todo then appeared right beside Yuji and said, don't focus on that for now. For now, we have an opponent to fight, and that should be our main focus above all else, brother. As now all 3 opponents were operating at 120% of their potential. As the 3 began their battle, this battle looking very similar to the one in canon, however, this Mahito was doing something very different in particular to the original Mahito, as he was actually focusing on making larger transfigured humans to get Yuji more and more into the mentality of using Shrine, almost as if he was trying to break Yuji by making him forced to use Shrine by giving him circumstances where using Shrine would be optimal, as he wanted to make sure that guilt was overwhelming Yuji more and more to get him into a similar mindset to what he was when they first started this fight. Once Yuji would be mentally broken, Mahito would go in for the strike, or at least that was his plan. Unfortunately for Mahito though, with Todo around there was no chance he could ever mentally break Yuji. Furthermore, Mahito was at an even weaker percentage of his soul HP than he was in canon, as this Mahito is around 35% of his HP due to taking additional damage from the Cleaves. However, this Mahito as a result is just more pressured to activate their 0.2 second domain expansion, and as a result of that, Todo loses his hand. But furthermore, the conversation between Mahito and Sukuna is a little bit different, where instead of Mahito telling Sukuna to not interfere and there wouldn't be enough time for him to interfere and that he'd kill Yuji before Sukuna could even awaken, instead in this timeline, he ends up saying to him, even though Yuji is now awoken your curse technique, he still doesn't have a chance to beat me, so just enjoy the show. However, something else different happens than what happened in canon, where in canon Yuji immediately went for the Black Flash. In this timeline, he had a little bit of a thought because he noticed that Todo got hit by the technique, got hit by the sure hit of the domain. So during this small time when the domain was going off, Yuji had to think about his decision to not use Shrine. If Yuji had used Shrine, would Mahito already be dead? How dare he be so selfish and care so much about his emotions that he ended up making Todo get hit by a domain? As Todo then swapped his own places with Yuji, and Yuji landed another Black Flash right on Mahito. However, this Black Flash was similar to the first one that he casted, as Yuji had landed even more cleaves directly on Mahito's body. But even more than that, these cleaves were even more potent than the ones in comparison to before. After all, not just did Yuji just land a Black Flash, which would amplify his ability to use the cleaves even further, but we know from the most recent find in the manga that the more and more Yuji gets adjusted to Cleave, the better output that it will get, mainly because the real reason why it's so weak right now in comparison to what it could be is because it's a freshly awakened technique. As it was then Mahito awakened into his true form, now facing against a Yuji that was willing to use Cleave and Dismantle. Mahito knew that he went too far in that moment. He wanted to break Yuji, but he didn't succeed in breaking Yuji. Instead, he succeeded in getting Yuji over this fear of becoming another Sukuna, over the fear that was holding him back, so he needed to take Yuji out and now before he could become a threat to himself. However, Mahito couldn't help but feel excited and happy for this, as the rival, the man who had stood in his way his entire life, the man who was able to push him this far, had now awakened himself and was growing at the same time. This was going to be the true ultimate battle to see who would be around the next 1,000 years, humanity or curses, with both of them pushing each other to their utmost limits, just continuing to grow and now being reborn in these moments. As the two of them begin their little hand-to-hand scuffle at first, but there is a slight difference from now in comparison to canon, where every time Yuji blocks a strike from Mahito, he takes a slight moment to grab onto Mahito's arm, to grab onto a part of Mahito's body, and lands a cleave right on his body. Now, these cleaves do not do that much damage to Mahito, however, there's something that Mahito was able to notice the more and more they fought. The more and more cleaves that Yuji had landed, the deeper and deeper the cuts got. Now, it wasn't deep enough to bypass the armor, but with time, this would become a problem, especially considering the weakened state of Mahito's soul in the current moment, as the both of them were growing as fighters. However, Yuji could also acknowledge something about the two of them fighting right now. If he had time, if the two of them were to fight at full HP, there was a chance that Yuji had that he could win. There was a chance if he had his full stamina right now, considering how he is growing in comparison to how Mahito is growing. However, Yuji was already in a weaker state than Mahito, as Mahito had directly said himself that he was at 10% of his soul HP. Now, yes, Mahito had been hit by 2 Black Flashes, but Yuji was already quite weakened as well. So Yuji ended up coming to the result that he would need to hit Mahito with another Black Flash and then Cleave and Dismantle combo to finally tear away Mahito right from this armor and tear Mahito away from this earth. As Mahito believed that if he focused his curse energy to the front of his body, to the side that he was going to attack Yuji with, the side that he thought that Yuji would land the Black Flash on, it would be game over, which under a normal circumstance, this plan would have worked. Until he heard the voice of a man that he had thought was out of this battle, which was Todo. And with the adrenaline rushing through Mahito's head, he ended up being tricked by Todo's trick, and he believed that Yuji was about to teleport right behind him. However, instead in that moment, Yuji went for the exposed part of his body, with Yuji landing a Black Flash on Mahito, resulting in the armor itself being torn away from Mahito's very body and being destroyed. However, in this moment, Yuji did something else. Yuji grabbed Mahito's 2 hands and used Cleave on both of his arms, destroying those arms, the very arms that he had used to transfigure so many. In that moment, Mahito did try and run away. Mahito tried to run away from Yuji, but it was to no luck. It was to no avail, as Mahito ended up stumbling even faster than he did originally, mainly because of the fact that Mahito was even more damaged. Not just was Mahito out of transfigured humans and out of curse energy, he did not have arms anymore. He was that much more injured, as it was then Yuji moved his hand onto Mahito's leg, destroying his leg with Cleave. And in that moment, Yuji was about to try and finish off Mahito, try and cleave Mahito apart, try and destroy Mahito's body. However, unfortunately for Yuji, in that moment, he was slammed into the ground, believed to have fallen through a hole, but he didn't know what had just happened, as Kenjaku had approached them. Kenjaku had approached the two of them, and did not waste any time, choosing to immediately use Cursed Spirit Manipulation on Mahito. Seeing Mahito's weakened state, he could tell that Mahito could die at any moment, and this could be bad. In truth, he wasn't even sure if Mahito in this type of state could use idol transfiguration for his goals, for his plans of starting the coming games. However, he would end up finding out pretty soon. Worst case scenario, he could just use a binding vow in order to actually make it work. However, in that moment, Kenjaku did also have to admit something else. He was actually proud at how fast Yuji was developing. Sure, yeah, he had a lot of expectations for Yuji, but Yuji was exceeding those expectations considering he had already awoken Shrine. However, unlike canon where Yuji was basically knocked to the ground, instead Kenjaku was a little bit curious, mainly because of the fact that Yuji had actually defeated Mahito a little bit earlier than he did in canon as well. So Kenjaku began to spawn a bunch of cursed spirits for Yuji to fight. After all, many hands make light work. And despite the fact that Yuji was able to destroy most of them with punches as well as grabbing them with Cleave, it wasn't enough. He ended up being thrown to the ground eventually by a couple of them and forced onto the ground, with Kenjaku being impressed enough for now with Yuji's progress. Before it was then Kyoto High entered into the scene, followed of course by Choso himself as well as everybody else, following into the scene and battling against Kenjaku. However, Urame in this timeline is actually a little bit impressed as well at the fact that Yuji had ended up awakening Shrine, with basically the rest of Shibuya going the exact same, with Kenjaku leaving after spawning in several millions curses in order to start the culling games and starting the culling games successfully with Mahito's curse technique. However, in this timeline, the higher-ups want Yuji dead even more than in comparison to before, as now they are very much aware of the fact that Yuji has access to Shrine, that Yuji has awakened Sukuna's curse technique. Not just was Yuji a threat for having Sukuna inside of him, but Yuji was also a threat because he wielded Sukuna's curse technique. This ends up with special grade sorcerer Yuta Akotsu being sent to hunt down Yuji Itadori. Now Yuta Akotsu was also aware of the fact that Yuji had awoken Shrine. Furthermore, Naoya also was sent out on his own desire in order to find Megumi and Yuji, in order to eliminate Yuji as well as eliminate Megumi, with both of them deciding to go out. However, this is when a slight change to the timeline is made. During the time where Yuji and Mahito had battled, it was at the peak of nighttime. However, during the time where Yuji had battled against Yuta Akotsu, we can see that it is daytime. The main reason that we can see it's daytime and the sun is rising is because at the end of the anime, they show that it's actually daytime when Yuji is luring away the cursed spirits. After that is when the Yuta Akotsu battle happens, which means several hours had passed of Yuji and Choso effectively hunting down cursed spirits. The reason why this is important is because Yuji is going to be somewhat focused on breaking in Cleave and Dismantle into his toolset. He wants to be better with it. Now, Shrine was very useful against Mahito, but he can sense that he had just awakened it and it was nowhere near the level that his body could feel was where Sukuna's was at. Now, of course, he did vow to himself to never use it on humans, to never use it on a human life, but he was going to use it on every single cursed spirit they ended up finding, as that was his purpose in the world, to hunt down and kill cursed spirits. So of each time the two of them had fought a cursed spirit, Yuji made sure in particular to keep using Cleave and Dismantle on them, to progress the technique further and further, and as a result of that, Yuji ended up being even better with Cleave and Dismantle, even starting to actually utilize Dismantle. As Choso couldn't help but notice the fact that Yuji was a demon god in comparison to what he was before. Not just was his curse energy control massively superior in comparison to what it was, but now Yuji had access to a curse technique, and that curse technique was only growing more and more. Yuji had added control and finesse to his curse energy, but he had also added a curse technique, a fine blade that he would keep sharpening more and more to eliminate every single curse that they would end up finding. However, this is when Yuta Akotsu and Naoya both end up finding Yuji and Choso, and the battle ends up going the exact same, mainly because of one important aspect, and that is Yuji's vow to never use Shrine on a human life. Furthermore, part of Yuji's already going to be holding back against Yuta like in canon, mainly because he was debating on whether he should let himself die or not. However, he does also almost end up using Cleave on Rika. However, Yuta quickly stabs Yuji and then uses RCT on him to bring him back, doing that entire trick while also knocking out Choso. So the entire explanation of the culling games, as well as the Hikari meetup arc, go the exact same, with of course Megumi and Yuji having their entire discussion as well, and the two of them choosing to go into the Tokyo barrier together, eventually resulting in Yuji Itadori battling against Higuruma Hiromi. However, in this timeline there is an immediate difference, as there is actually a curse technique now available to take away from Yuji Itadori, which would have ended up catching Higuruma completely off guard, mainly because of the fact that he wasn't expecting Yuji Itadori to have a curse technique. From what you can tell, Yuji was mainly fighting with curse energy reinforcement for this entire battle, so when he had taken away the curse technique, that was not at all what he was expecting. as this ended up bringing this battle to a halt, as Higuruma couldn't help but question why. Why had Yuji Itadori not used his curse technique? Based on every single sorcerer that he had battled so far, no sorcerer just hid away what their curse technique was, and he could tell there was something deeper to it for Yuji Itadori. It wasn't just Yuji Itadori being tactical, there had to be something more. After all, Yuji was an open book. As Yuji then explained what happened in Shibuya, and how Sukuna had utilized this very technique to wipe out hundreds to thousands of souls in Malevolent Shrine, wiped out several souls in his body just for fun, using the same technique of Shrine, a monstrous technique that was only made to hurt life, that was made to destroy life, something that he would vow to never use again other than against cursed spirits, the same entities that did vow to destroy life. As Higuruma began to think to himself, began to think about the fact that it wasn't just some tactical reason that Yuji chose not to use Shrine. No, it was because Yuji was afraid of becoming a monster. It was because Yuji did not want to become like Sukuna. It was because Yuji didn't want to end lives like Sukuna did. And Yuji viewed this technique as evil. Yuji viewed this technique as the same way he viewed the monster itself being Sukuna, viewing it as nothing more than something that is evil. However, Higuruma in that moment also had a flashback. After all, it was similar to how he viewed the law, how he viewed justice. At first, he thought justice was good. He thought justice was a good thing. However, several people twisted it for their own twisted ideals. Justice had been turned from something it wasn't meant to be. Justice was made to be neutral, made to punish all equally, but then he also remembered something else. Those who had been unfairly punished by those crimes. Of course, justice didn't know everything about the person, didn't know every single circumstance. So by extension, he came to the realization that law and order could be used for anything so long as it's in the right hand. That Higuruma had been using law and order for evil desires in the same way that Yuji Itadori had refused to use Cleave and Dismantle because he viewed it as evil. So, Higuruma decided to explain something else to Yuji, something that only Higuruma could really explain to him because no one around Yuji was experienced enough to actually know this. Of course, there was one person who was experienced enough, but that person was currently stuck inside of a box. As Higuruma then asked Yuji, alright, why don't you stop punching people? After all, the initial purpose of punching was to hurt other people, to put down the lives of other people. However, that's not why you stopped punching, is it? Sukuna's curse technique is in a similar vein. Sure, yes, Shrine had eliminated the lives of hundreds to thousands, but that was in the hands of Sukuna. That was Sukuna using it. Just as punches can mercilessly take lives, a punch can also end up being the thing necessary in order to save lives as well. Shrine is the exact same as that. After all, it's up to you how to utilize it. If you want to use it to help people, then use it to help people. But don't let how someone else use it get in the way of how you will use it. It is a tool in your arsenal, nothing more, nothing less. You are the one that will decide the fate of that tool. As that was when Higuruma deactivated his curse technique and gave Yuji back Shrine, as Yuji had proven the goodness inside of his heart, proven it by proving why he did not want to use it, because he didn't want to hurt people, a pure intention, one that had reminded him of so many faces that he had seen in the past. As Higuruma agreed to make the rules that Yuji had requested from him, as the rest of the culling games end up going the exact same until we get to 214. Now, while Yuji does have access to Shrine, I don't think the angel would actually be able to tell that Yuji is Sukuna's vessel, mainly because I don't think Yuji having Shrine should make it any more or less obvious considering how little Yuji does use Shrine, and the fact that Yuji doesn't really fight anyone up to that point. And everything just seems to be going extremely well for Yuji. They were about to free Gojo. His role in all of this that he was allowed to play was about to be over, and soon he'd likely be executed for having the 15 fingers of Sukuna inside of him. Everything was just going well. However, he then heard something from Sukuna. He couldn't actually process what that word was fully on his own. However, he was knocked out, and the moment after, everything had completely changed. Sukuna was no longer in Yuji's body, he was now in the body present of his friend, Megumi Fushiguro, as it was then Sukuna punched Yuji straight through a building, several buildings at that, knocking him out for a little bit. When Yuji woke up, he couldn't see anybody around. He was confused at what was happening until Sukuna looked down to Yuji and said, "Still here, huh?" Before it was then Yuji in a blood rage jumped at Sukuna, pushing him through a building and causing the entire roof that he was previously standing on to be destroyed, as Yuji threw Sukuna through a building before launching out Dismantles right at Sukuna, following that attack with his own physical attacks as well. As Sukuna was massively confused by all of this. Of course, he has seen rage boosts in the past, and he was expecting Yuji to get stronger as a result of the residue curse energy inside of Yuji. This was much more powerful than what it should have been. After all, not just was Yuji's physicals a lot stronger, but also his cleave and dismantle was a lot stronger as well, as Yuji threw a slab of concrete right at Sukuna's face, following it immediately with another dismantle, while at the same time going for a punch straight on Sukuna's back. However, this then confirmed Sukuna's suspicions about who Yuji was and who Yuji's parentage truly was. This power couldn't have just been from the fact that Yuji was a vessel. There was certainly something more to it, before Sukuna landed a kick straight on Yuji's face, launching him back. Before Yuji shouted at Sukuna, questioning why can't they just live without causing suffering, why can't they just live normally? Before Sukuna launched out a dismantle of his own right on Yuji's chest, and while Yuji did try and block with his now stronger dismantles, even with the buff that he had gotten, it still ended up getting overpowered by Sukuna. Sukuna did have to admit he was internally a bit impressed by how far Yuji had gone with the technique in such a short amount of time, but he did know Yuji would never be able to match him with that technique, because he wasn't Sukuna. As Sukuna then said, "To me, the real question is why are you all so weak? Why do such weaklings cling so fiercely to life? How can a creature that falls apart at a touch say that it always wants to be happy? The helpless have no choice but to swallow the suffering life gives them." As Yuji challenges Sukuna to swallow his suffering, and Sukuna says to bring it before launching out a massive wave of dismantles right on Yuji's body. However, this time Yuji decides to defend himself in his own way. That way he defends himself is by launching dismantles out through his own body to try and counter slash against the dismantles that Sukuna had launched out. Now, because Yuji made no indicator with his fingers, the dismantles were already going to be weaker than they would be normally. Furthermore, he wasn't as mastered as Sukuna would be. However, for some reason, Yuji's dismantles were able to tie out Sukuna's dismantles. And Sukuna was immediately confused by that. Yuji's slashes were not that powerful. Even if Yuji did get stronger from his rage, that shouldn't have made him strong enough to fight against those slashes before he felt his hand shake and he realized what was happening. Megumi Fushiguro had lowered his curse energy output, while at the same time Yuji immediately landed a punch straight on Sukuna's jaw. Despite the fact that Megumi was lowering Sukuna's curse energy output, it wasn't going to be enough, mainly because of one little factor. Yuji at the start of 215 was already pretty exhausted from having to fight Sukuna like that, but now Yuji had been using Dismantle several times, including a Dismantle he had to power up in order to actually make battle against Sukuna's own Dismantles. So even with Maki arriving in order to help Yuji, it isn't enough. It isn't enough to stop Sukuna and eventually Urame when Urame joins in to show up as well. However, unfortunately, this is the end of the what if. Now, as much as I would love to explore how Yuji having a much more mastered version of Shrine would actually affect the battle against Sukuna later in, I don't think I can actually make a video on that, mainly because there are still too many unknowns around Sukuna, in my opinion, and the battle is still going. So I might end up making a sequel to this video when that battle is finally over, but for the sake of this video, it is over. So comment down your thoughts on the what if. I'm gonna see y'all later. Peace out. Have a good day.